Welcome to the Great Shrimp Shoal. Today we're going to be properly starting on the third tank in my collection, a tank earmarked for a community of ghost shrimp. I hope that you enjoy some of the neat things that I designed for this tank. Anyway, let's get things started. Before we get things started, I wanted to quickly ask you to make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. With this tank, I actually responded to what you, the viewers, liked most so far out of all of my videos. So I decided to make a tank specifically to highlight ghost shrimp and give the best viewing experience for these quirky looking invertebrates. Another week gone and the new tank is now doing much better. A water change means that the hardness levels have dropped slightly, and a new filter has started to cycle through the tank. The filter is now passing the water over the filter elements, including some granulated carbon and, of course, the biomedia. I'm using a dirt cheap AquaClear 50 filter with all of the media stacked like a 3-layer pancake. The biomedia that I'm using is the Brightwater BC series that I love so much, and it is a basic fired ceramic media with a medium-high porosity. It is unlikely that the biomedia has been used for camp as the bacteria as of yet, but the carbon will have already started to pull out impurities and particulates by now. At first I gave the tank water a few days to settle, but there were still some dissolved solids and cloudiness that boosted the hardness of the water, and it didn't seem to be clearing up at all. After adding the filter, I could see the effects quickly, as the water had become much clearer over just a 24-hour period. I did another water change and then proceeded to add the planting substrate to the trough in the center of the tank. It really started to look like what I had originally imagined. The substrate is the fluval stratum substrate, and it is supposed to drop the pH and add nutrients to help plants grow. Additionally, it is all shrimp safe, so none of the fertilizers or nutrients would be something that would harm invertebrates, and that includes the snails as well. Adding the substrate kicked up a lot of dust from the volcanic soil that is used to make the beads. Again, it took only a short while for the substrate dust to be filtered out or to drop to the bottom of the tank. If it hadn't cleared up by now, I was planning on using the diatom filters that I have to do a power cleaning of the water, for the simple reason that I was worried that too much dissolved solids could be fatal for the shrimp that I was planning to add, especially if those particulates were something harmful that came off of the cement. Before adding the substrate, the water continuously tested hard, with a high carbonate hardness and total hardness as well as high pH. The substrate is supposed to drop the pH, but just adding a few cupfuls had dramatic results. The hardness across the board as well as the pH dropped drastically and mirrored that of the water in my other planted tanks. I took this as a sign that it was time to add the rest of the substrate and look into the plants that I was going to put into this tank right away. I knew that I wanted something different in the plants that I chose for this new 20-gallon tank, because the ghost shrimp were going to be large, gangly residents that usually preferred to hang out on stalks of grass in the wild. I really didn't want to add long grass to this already shallow tank, and it was made even more shallow by creating the planter. But I did have some ideas on what I could actually add. I picked up an Anubis crypt and some Monte Carlo. The Monte Carlo is a creeping plant and it has good root structures, and its runners continue rooting much like Rotala, so it should grow quickly to cover the substrate. The Anubis will be much more slow growing and shouldn't spread out at all over the course of this tank's life, but it should be more than able to take care of itself and stand up to any plant that encroaches on its territory. They are notoriously hardy after all. You can just take them and stuff them into the sand or cram them in between a pair of sticks, twigs, or branches. For them, the quality of the water is a little bit more important than the substrate that you are planting with. I sequestered the new plants outdoors in my quarantine tank with the mystery moss that has been growing expeditiously for the last month. I did this for two reasons. First, to see if there were any snails lurking on the stems or under the leaves. I have a good track record of catching the tiny sand-sized snails before they're able to start a second generation. If you remember, my first foray into snail keeping ended disastrously with the pink ram's horn snails that I added to the forest propagating rapidly. Still, I don't want a repeat of that again if I can avoid it altogether. The moss was snail free, and after a few days I would check the tank again to see if there were any hitchhikers. The second reason is that the quarantine tank is outdoors, so it gives the plants a lot of UV heavy sunlight, warmth, and a natural cycle. This should boost the roots and leaves, especially since I'm about to shove them into an artificial environment for the rest of their lives. The quarantine tank has been an interesting addition to my garden, because, after all, being outdoors, it has become a home for some hitchhikers of its own. I found some small worm-like things blanketing the bottom of the quarantine tank, and at first I thought that they were detritus worms because they share a lot of similarities. But I found out that they were moth fly larvae, and there was one giveaway that helped me identify them. The moth fly larvae have a dark brown head and tail, whereas detritus worms are clear opaque white throughout. Again, I'm not really worried about that because a simple rinse should get rid of any of the stragglers, and if any of them do make it into the 20-gallon tank, they are not exactly harmful or masters of stealth, so it should be pretty easy to pick them out. After a few days, I took the plunge and planted the Anubis and Monte Carlo bits. I don't know if I'll use the moss in this tank now because it will become pretty busy after the new plants take some roots and start to grow. It's really starting to come together though, and in a week or two I should be able to add the shrimp. Basically, I'd want to see some algae start to form so that the quick influx of shrimp doesn't tip the scales and send the tank with all of its new residents into some kind of shock. The Anubis and Monte Carlo look really nice, and I am glad that I have another couple of plant types to grow between my 3 tanks. It's good to have a selection running, and it will be a great help when I make decorating choices in a new tank in the future, and that will be that much easier to have a ready supply of good growing plants on hand. Moving on to my already established tanks. Let's start with the Forest 10-gallon tank and see what's going on this week. The Forest has been doing amazingly well. The water has cleared up considerably now that it has been moved away from the window where it sat for nearly a year. It's really amazing that I've had this tank for over a year now. It has gone through a lot, and honestly it keeps rebounding from some pretty gnarly problems. If I were my past self, I probably would have dumped the water a few times by now and restarted with new substrate and plants. It's encouraging that I've gained the confidence to see these problems through to a solution instead. I feel like the clarity has got a lot to do with the sunlight, and potentially the plant load that was in this tank. I can't help but think that if I let the Rotala get out of control again, it will cause another algae bloom, and that could last for months. As for the shrimp, and specifically the juvenile shrimp, they are starting to get some of their green color back. The juveniles have been growing rapidly in this tank for the last 2 months, and as I mentioned previously, it seems that each shrimp is a different size, with some being much smaller than others who were born at the same time. I don't know if that has to do with gender or with diet, but obviously we'll have to wait and see how that turns out in the long run. The forest's solo matriarch is also looking more healthy each day that I check in on her, and each of the juvenile shrimp is growing into their adult coloration. Some of the juveniles are getting a greenish tint, and a few are getting a more tan color. Presumably all of the darkest green colored Neocaridina died out before they had a chance to propagate in the forest. What is really interesting though is how many of this group of baby shrimp survived in a tank where nothing seemed to survive before. As of the last count, there were close to 21 individuals in this tank, and that is more than all of the adults that I had at any one time for this setup. Here, and in my other tanks, I think I'm going to aim to keep the plants a little bit more in check and trimmed back, as that is when the shrimp population has done the best. I've also had less algae blooms, or I've seen them resolve more quickly in the tanks with fewer plants. Yet another thing that I'll have to experiment with, as I think the planted tanks still look the best when they're fully grown. Over in the 30-gallon tank, the snowball shrimp have been keeping their community numbers stable, but no explosion of baby shrimp has materialized like I had expected. This has been especially surprising after having seen such a high number of egg-laying adults that were roaming around the tank for the last 5 months. That community is doing alright though, so I'm going to leave them alone for a while and focus instead on the 2 bamboo shrimp that live there. I have been trying to make their home as appealing as possible, and as recounted in my last ordeal with them, it is clear that they are clumsy, foolish animals who will use whatever opportunity to get themselves stuck chasing the smallest amount of food. They are interesting though, and I've been trying to catch them molting. Unfortunately, it hasn't been easy. They seem to prefer to do it at night, and who could blame them? But that has made capturing the time-lapse of the process next to impossible. A few weeks ago, I thought that one of the 2 bamboo shrimp was dying because they stopped moving and held all their appendages close to their body. A few days later, I had figured out why, as their exoskeleton was laying on the floor. They had molted. So, when I saw the other bamboo shrimp doing the exact same thing, I picked a few chance moments to try and film a time-lapse to capture the process for the first time. Unfortunately, I had no luck, but I do believe that I caught them sleeping for what seemed like about 40 plus minutes. Truly majestic creatures. Anyway, that about wraps it up for today's video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that I know what type of videos you guys like best. I'll make sure to have an update on the stocking of the 20-gallon tank next, and I'm going to have another time-lapse cleaning of the 30-gallon tank soon, where I clean it from top to bottom, so that should be interesting for sure. For now, it's time to say goodnight. I'll see you guys next time, and until then, I hope that you have some sweet, shrimpy dreams.